Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents New Deal Law and Order, How the War on Crime Built the Modern Liberal State, by Anthony Gregory, narrated by Bob Johnson. Introduction. President Franklin D. Roosevelt spoke proudly of his record on crime as he campaigned in 1936. 4 days before voters emphatically re-elected him, the incumbent reminded a Brooklyn audience of his first term's accomplishments, from the National Recovery Administration to the Tennessee Valley Authority. Roosevelt then credited his successful war on crime for making the country's homes and places of business safer against the gangster, the kidnapper, and the racketeer. In response to those who might decry his New Deal and crime policies as meddling and interference, the president celebrated these new stones in a foundation for a structure of economic security for all our people, a safer, happier, more American America. The struggle against crime, Roosevelt suggested, was a significant part of his plan to secure the nation. The phrase war on crime was not new. Politicians and journalists used the same language to describe national efforts under Roosevelt's predecessor, President Herbert Hoover, who faced a sensationalized rise in racketeering and kidnappings. But just as his 1936 campaign speech suggested, Roosevelt made the war on crime his own. He dramatically escalated it into a sweeping, multi-pronged offensive against lawlessness. As journalist Herbert Corey explained that same year, Roosevelt delivered action where his predecessors and critics offered empty talk. According to Corey's book, Farewell, Mr. Gangster, America's War on Crime, President Hoover spent $500,000 on a major crime commission whose report got nowhere at all. Roosevelt and his Attorney General, Homer Cummings, in contrast, produced results. Although America was still the most lawless nation, the new national leadership was inspiring governors to convene state conferences on crime. Corey described matters accurately. The New Dealers indeed overhauled America's approach to crime. They immediately amplified President Hoover's reactive war, targeting the infamous outlaws of the early 1930s like John Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd. Then the New Dealers brought longer-term changes to law enforcement and relations between the federal government and the states. After Prohibition ended, even as crime fell, the federal criminal code swelled. The Roosevelt administration flexed its interstate commerce muscles against bank robbers and targeted new classes of contraband, from automatic firearms to marijuana. Creative constitutionalism and progressive social welfare ideas accommodated this muscular strategy. Modern regulation and criminology converged in pursuit of what would become known as white-collar crime. Alcatraz became a civilian penitentiary. Prison construction accelerated, and incarceration, parole, and probation rates broke national records. In 1939, the inmate population reached a per capita peak that would not be reached again until the late 1970s. J. Edgar Hoover's Bureau of Investigation was modernized and renamed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, as it achieved new powers and prestige and stamped its imprimatur on police departments nationwide. Roosevelt recognized the importance of these criminal justice developments, even alongside his many other groundbreaking policies. In those same years when the New Deal gave rise to the modern American state, law and order became good national politics. For all of living memory, many factions distrusted law enforcement, particularly at the federal level. The New Dealers prevailed where previous attempts had failed to build enduring law and order relations across society and the different scales of government. To achieve this, Roosevelt and Cummings, in effect, created a war on crime coalition to transcend the institutional and ideological divisions that had precluded a nationally cohesive effort. Academia, the legal community, and law enforcement found their place. Essential Democratic constituencies, organized labor, white Southerners, and black Americans had traditionally regarded national law enforcement as a source of hostility or neglect. The New Deal war on crime brought these groups deeper into Roosevelt's ambit, reconciling and fusing individualism and progressivism, which in past eras had been in tension. This political triumph altered liberalism and federalism. American liberalism, a political program seeking to balance freedom and social needs in pursuit of democratic stability, has periodically adjusted to accommodate each momentous development in government. Federalism, the balancing of both deferential and adversarial relations between national and state authority, has also undergone major changes in accordance with the great ruptures in U.S. history. The changes in federalism and liberalism are often understood together. Consequential constitutional innovations have coincided with commensurate refinements in liberalism, both of which have often turned on the tension between the freedom that politics and law have promised to secure and the limitations on power they have presumed to respect. The histories of federalism and liberalism have together tracked the rise of what we might call the modern liberal state. More specifically, over time, liberalism and federalism have each made demands on law enforcement while constraining its activities. It makes sense that the 1930s metamorphosis in crime policy, no less than economic policy, chaperoned the country's constitutional and ideological evolution. The war on crime was vital to the New Deal's transformation of America. It advanced a new and lasting settlement across jurisdictions, among institutions and factions, and between freedom and authority. In short, the New Deal war on crime built American law and order. But it did so not only in the narrow sense of modernizing law enforcement and criminal justice infrastructure. It also built law and order in the broader sense of bringing institutional and ideological stability to the American state. Roosevelt and Cummings's crime policies delivered legitimacy to national enforcement authority, accommodating economic reforms and laying the foundations of modern government. These crime policy accomplishments were more than a radical moment, to borrow Ira Katznelson's phrase, but an enduring departure for American governance. By the late 1930s, the transformed federalism and liberalism could accommodate a distinctly durable and politically acceptable type of security infrastructure. The modern liberal state that would define the 20th century with its unity of welfare liberalism, carceral repression, and national security regimentation arose largely from the crucible of Roosevelt's anti-crime campaign. Contemporaries of the New Deal war on crime acknowledged its importance, and so have commenters and scholars ever since. But as historians have written the story of those years, crime policy has mainly been relegated to the periphery. Other aspects of the New Deal have dominated our historical imagination, and thus popular narratives and scholarly treatments tend not to spotlight law and order. Our general understanding of the New Deal has widened thanks to exciting work since the 1980s, but accounts of interwar liberalism rarely feature its dialectic with crime. Rarely do the early 1930s shootouts, New Deal criminology, and the 1940s security and surveillance story all come together. The few focused studies of the New Deal war on crime do suggest something quite significant. In 1995, Mary M. Stolberg observed that anti-crime efforts revealed complexities in the development of federalism from the Progressive era through the Roosevelt years. In 1998, Claire Bond Potter's War on Crime unveiled the cultural importance of FBI operations in the early New Deal. Some historians have stressed the tensions between the Bureau of Investigation's expansion and the New Deal. Others have stressed the affinities. Political scientist Matthew G.T. Denny has recently argued that the New Deal war on crime had a ratchet effect in state building, driven by a political consensus that excluded Black Americans. Historian Emily M. Brooks has explored what Northern urban policing in the 1930s and 1940s reveals about the limitations of law and order liberalism in addressing an unequal society. One nagging question is whether the war on crime was simply one of many programs sustained by the Roosevelt administration's general state-building energy, or whether it was more central to defining the New Deal state. Focused on the 1930s war on kidnapping, Kathleen J. Friedel has highlighted the coterminous advance of the social welfare state with the security state in a project that legitimized and extended the case for federal power in general. Scholars have...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?